Cool. Very busy session, actually. So, lovely to see you all. Some familiar names in the room, some people I've never met before. For those that don't know me, my name is Nick. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of a AI skills training company here in the UK called Edifai. We're very excited to host this webinar today, and we're joined by a very special guest, Phil Dearson, who I've known for goodness, Phil. I was thinking about this before we started. Nearly a decade, I think, which is
Yeah, I think it's every possible. I could be your dad.
well, let's not go into that for now. So huge thanks to everyone that's joined us today. I'm going to leave the floor really very much to Phil. We've been through this talk before. It's some seriously challenging and thought-provoking stuff. As I mentioned before, we have enabled Q&A. So if you want to ask any questions, just click the Q&A button down the bottom of the chat, but down the bottom of Zoom there. Submit those questions as we go, and we'll pick them up if time permits. But without further ado, handing over to you, Phil.
All right, thanks very much. Hello, I'm Phil Dearson. If you don't know who I am, and why would you? I run a systems consultancy over in the UK called Volcano Base, and we spend our time designing and implementing automated and AI systems, so you don't have to work so hard. But enough about me. So this session is based on a white paper that I've produced for Edifai, and it's got loads more content and detail and practical suggestions in it than we can possibly hope to cover in about half an hour. But you'll get a link to it somehow at the end of this presentation or via email. The full white paper includes an analysis really of where we are and what's coming next over the next few years and what the implications are for organizations. So we'll be looking at things like the 5 levels of AI capability and how soon they're going to arrive. The implications for organizations, so things like workforce skills, workforce design, organization design. There are some things from history that we can learn from. That's not often the case. History will teach us nothing sometimes, but there are some precedents for the sort of degree of change that we like to experience. So we'll look at those. And then the white paper has got more detail, so an action playbook for the next 2 years, and then a 12-month roadmap for the sorts of things you could be looking at immediately. But let's just get on with it, shall we? So the coming shockwave. Again, all the citations are in the white paper. It's been very thoroughly researched. We're looking at all the available evidence from the people who are able to conduct the kind of research that gives us access to meaningful statistics. So that's not just, the big 4 consultancies who, often have a slightly warped perspective on things, but it's organizations like the World Economic Forum as well, central banks, etc. So we're looking at by 2030, about 22% of all roles to change materially by 2030. So that means it's a different role entirely. About 59% of workers are going to need significant reskilling, or they're at risk, frankly. And innovation cycles are now being compressed down from years and years to months, sometimes weeks. And that's going to have a huge implication on all organizations, not just HR, not just agencies, everybody. Excuse me. So in order to give some kind of meaning to these stats, we need to have a look at what's coming next. Now, back in the summer of, was it 2020, 2022, possibly, OpenAI published a thing that they called the 5 levels of AI capability. And then they very rapidly took it down for reasons which may become clear. However, enterprising internet users are enterprising, and they took copies of it. And of course, I have a copy. So I wanted to talk you through how the capabilities of AI is likely to progress over the next few years and what some of that might mean to us. We'll come on to some of the things you can do about it shortly. So level 1, they posited, was chatbots, which we acquired with ChatGPT in 2022. There's no real point going into much detail about those. You probably wouldn't be on this webinar if you didn't know what an AI chatbot was. Reasoners we got in 2024. Now, they didn't have dates on these, by the way, when they published them. They were just saying this is the likely likely sequence of progression, given our understanding of the technology. So reasoners came next. And reasoners are, if you've ever used tools like O1 or O3 or deep research, things like that, they are able to think through a request before deciding how they're going to go about answering it. What do I know about the person who's asking the question? What do I know about this subject area? Where can I find more information? Okay, they probably want an answer in the following way. So we got those at the end of 2024, which was 8 months ago. Level 3 was agents. Now, agents, there's not a huge degree of agreement, even within the AI industry, about exactly what an agent is. But the kind of working description that we're going with are they're AI models that can use tools autonomously. So what that means is you can give an AI a sequence of instructions, for example, like book me some cinema tickets. And then the agent will have the ability to go onto the internet, use a web browser, fill out a form, use your credit card details, check your calendar to find a good time for you, add a calendar event, invite your friends, do the whole job for you. Now, we've started getting agents, in inverted commas, this year. And you may well see a lot of software vendors out there on the internet at the moment claiming that they have agents. And there are some agentic-like features that some of these software systems have, but they're not likely to go away. In fact, what we're starting to see are protocols being built into software that allow one agent to communicate with another. This is beyond the scope, really, of this talk. I think you can have a look at some of our other webinars or check out some of the articles on our websites to see what that means, particularly in terms of things like marketing, for example, where you may end up marketing to an agent rather than a human being. Level 4 is innovators. Now, innovators are expert systems that have a high degree of domain knowledge, and they can design systems themselves. So they can design systems, they can design products, they can come up with novel, new things that haven't existed before, like proteins, for example. AlphaFold by Google is already doing that. It's designing new proteins that have never existed before. The thing that's interesting about innovators in the OpenAI description is that they choose to do this autonomously. So they're making more decisions about the sorts of products and services that they think should be created and acting largely autonomously. That, given the available research, is looking like we might start seeing these capabilities in about 2028 to 2030, somewhere in that horizon. Now, these time estimates are conservative, believe it or not. There are many people out there who are predicting that the time horizon for the arrival of things like innovators is going to be much, much closer, like over the course of 1 year, 18 months. But that remains to be seen. We'll see what OpenAI's announcement about ChatGPT 5 is in the next few weeks, if it comes out. And then level 5, and it's virtually impossible to see beyond level 5 unless you start talking about things like artificial general intelligence, which is all a little bit sci-fi still, really. Level 5 is about autonomous organizations. So if you take the innovators there, or the agents even, and you give them a role inside an organization may be created entirely out of agents and innovators. And they decide what the purpose is of that organization, and they decide a course of action, they map out a strategy, and they start to assign roles and responsibilities to each of the different agents inside that organization, who then get on with the business of getting stuff done. If you think of it a bit like a swarm of bees in a hive, with each bee being an agent or an innovator, an AI in its own right, an AI system in its own right. Now, I appreciate some of this might sound a little bit far-fetched, but this is not the far-fetched stuff. This is the stuff that is highly likely. And we're looking at organizations within about, 4.5 years now. So it's coming down the track really quite quickly. And I also appreciate, my wife also works in HR, and she said, look, she read the white paper and she said, can you just let people know it's okay to feel a little bit mind blown, because everybody's mind is a little bit blown, and just recognize that it can be a bit overwhelming, particularly for people who think that they're going to have to be, working within their organization to try and adapt or cope with some of these levels of changes. So it's all right. Everybody's confused. So let's have a little talk about what some of the implications are for organizations. Data readiness is really, really important, really important. You'll have heard this with any kind of algorithm: garbage in, garbage out. If you've got a load of rubbish data just sitting around the place, then you can't hope to get any of the benefits from automated or AI systems. Now, by data readiness, what I really mean is approaching structured knowledge. So if you've got a file system, which I know you do, which has got a billion files in it with final X, final, no, really this time, and AI is going to really struggle to interpret or navigate that total mess. And if you're keeping important information in emails, or in even worse, attachments on emails, then there's no way that that can then become part of a system. So you can't capitalize on the benefits of AI. So look for structured knowledge, you'll get better outcomes. Workforce design is a huge implication. Now, if we're thinking about people, there's a lot of research into who benefits most from AI. Now, in the past, you might have a generalist, for example, and then a specialist who's a subject matter expert. Now, subject matter experts can perform extremely well when enhanced by AI, but to a certain extent, they don't really need the organization that much anymore. And when you have generalists who have, maybe fairly shallow roots, but across a number of different domains, if you enhance them with AI tooling and skills, then suddenly those roots go really, really deep, and they can have a profound impact on an organization. A generalist can understand the goals of your organization, maybe some of the financial metrics that you're trying to focus on. They might understand the creative process. They might understand a degree about development, and they may well understand something about marketing, getting things out into the world. And so then they can do all of this stuff on their own, or with a couple of partners, maybe partnered with a few specialists, and make a massive difference to an organization. So considering the role of generalists they're going to be more valuable to your organization in the future. Again, I'm covering this quite lightly because I just want to pull out the key headlines for you, and then you can go into the depth in the white paper, maybe over a cup of gin or something. Workforce design. So when you have a series of generalists who are effectively like a cross-departmental powerhouse in their own right, they're able to do a huge amount, then suddenly these kind of notions of old school org charts don't really work anymore. The role of hierarchy is suddenly questionable, because if you have to wait for a sequence of approvals, for example, from a human being while you're trying to get something done, it's going to slow the whole thing down. So when you have generalists enhanced by AI, that's going to change the shape of the workforce. And another point to make, another implication for organizations, is you're going to get more out of AI if it's integrated into the workflows and processes that you already have inside your organization, to start with at least. It's fun, isn't it, to boot up ChatGPT or an equivalent and have a bit of a play, and it solves a particular problem for you. But if actually your workflow involves you being inside, I don't know, an ATS or some kind of system, a CRM system or something like that, then you have to hop out and you do some stuff in ChatGPT and it gives you an answer, and you're basically cutting and pasting all the time between these various different systems. But we've reached a level of maturity now already where you can integrate AI into the workflows that you already have. So it's certainly worth looking at your processes again, organization-wide, and just saying, okay, well, this process here, what role might AI play or automation play? Where can AI take on this specific aspect of the workflow, or maybe even the entirety of a particular workflow? Without you having to do anything with it. So it becomes invisible almost as part of your process. Stuff just happens when you integrate AI into your business system. Skills is another area. I know we've got quite a lot of HR type people signed up for this. Skills is a movable feast, and because of the pace of change with the technologies, you really need to start considering things like 90-day skill reviews, or at least much faster than maybe the annual or biannual ones that you're already doing. Because as every new model comes out, it delivers a whole new set of capabilities for people. And they may need skills in order to capitalize on some of those, or it may make some of the skills that they already have totally irrelevant. And reviewing them at a much faster cadence is going to be quite important. In the white paper, one of the recommendations that I make is to have a kind of a 0-day team. If you've got a slightly larger organization, is to have a 0-day team. And whenever there's a new model, a significant new model release from one of the AI vendors, is for them to experiment with it to death, try and break it as quickly as they possibly can, so that then they can communicate the implications to the organization and you can discuss your skill strategy. But reviewing it faster, doesn't have to be 90 days. And the rise of micro entities this is a trend that particularly the World Economic Forum have been tracking for about 4 years now. I think it's about 4, there or thereabouts. And it's kind of a reaction to what's going on in the workplace at the moment. So there are lots and lots of redundancies, as you know, and there may be a whole range of different reasons for that. Some of them might be to do with technological change. Some of them probably to do with geopolitics and the economic situation that some of us find ourselves in. But if we ignore what's going to happen with these AI technologies for too long, then all we're left with is a slightly reactionary, remedial kind of step, which is probably going to mean large-scale redundancies. So if we just wait for events to hit us, there's only really one response, which is redundancy. Now, there are some things maybe that we might be able to do as an organization to capitalize on the rise of micro entities. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So micro entities are really small organizations. It can just be an individual, maybe up to about 5 of them. And they tend to be some of the most experienced people inside your organization who've been let go, who've been made redundant, or they've just decided, you know what, I can't work like this anymore, I can't bear it. And they've spun off and they've tried to do their own thing. But they're doing it with the support of AI. And so they're able to achieve loads more than they ever could as an individual. And in fact, operate as an entire business, but just as one person, but with much, much greater impact than they ever been able to before. Maybe sometimes even rivaling the company that made them redundant. Again, there's lots of citations and links for further information about microentities in the white paper. But you've got an option here. It doesn't have to be, okay, look, we're going to lose this talent. This talent is going to leave our organization and then it's gone. We're bereft. That might be one scenario, but you may choose to stay in contact with these people, or even better, support the activities that they're trying to build. I've listed again in the white paper a whole set of resources, which are things companies that are making some of this talent redundant might be able to provide them to help them set up on their own and form some kind of virtuous circle where the work that they're doing is still of some benefit to your core company, even as your core company shrinks in size. Just may all become better connected to a set of micro entities. I'm running out of time, so I'll just move on a little bit. So if you take these changes and you elevate them up to nation scale, that's going to be a huge impact for lots and lots of people that have failed to prepare for it. And as I say, it's coming over the next few years. Not trying to be alarmist, this is just the best version of fact that we have available at the moment. Yeah, I might get that on a t-shirt. But there are some historical precedents for things that can be done when social change is of the kind of type that we're about to see. So, I think this is slightly in the wrong place, but I'm going to talk about it now anyway. Yes, so this is an org chart, in fact, the very first org chart from a railway company in America, I believe it was. And the next org charts didn't come around for about 100 years, and they were created by IBM. And they're the ones that we're more familiar with. You know, you have like a hierarchy starting at the top, and then you have various different people reporting up. But this org chart for the railways is completely different. It's inverted for a start. And so down the bottom, you've got the leadership. You've got the people who are vested in controlling the railways or owning the railways. But what they didn't want, so they're like the roots of the tree, if you like, which is maybe just a psychological shift. But the thing that's interesting, I think, is that they didn't want control. They didn't want control or power. And this org chart is all about trying to diffuse decision making and autonomy to the edges of the organization. So all these different clumps you see are almost like mini organizations that have their own autonomy, but they're related to an almost subservient leadership. The Industrial Revolution had huge social change, but there were a range of different things that were brought in to help people adapt to it. Now, admittedly, this was over decades-long transition, and we are not going to have a decades-long transition because this is all happening much faster this time around. But in the Industrial Revolution, we ended up with things like mandates that children had to go to school. You know, we didn't have that before. And that started to change and then create the sort of society that we have today. We started to get legislation as well, things like workers' acts, acts that would protect employees. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we don't start to see nation-level initiatives like mandatory schooling and employee protections that are appropriate for a more AI-driven age. Got things like the GI Bill as well, for people coming back from the war. Again, this is a state-sponsored way of helping people learn new skills and adjust to a new economy. Again, we're going to have a new economy quite soon. And then furlough in the pandemic. If you are in the UK, you will have experienced this probably if you were employed at the time. So this is people being paid not to work. Now, there's a renowned economist who focuses on AI. I think he's the University of West Virginia. I think he is. Forgotten his name. His thoughts on the economy of the next 5-ish years are that we as individuals, it's unrealistic for us to expect that the majority of our income is going to come from salary, because AI will do most of the work, or a lot of it anyway. So we may again see nation-level systems that allow corporations to benefit from using AI and accumulate great wealth, but it's distributed more evenly, new forms of income distribution. I told you it would be a bit of a mind blower. So there are precedents anyway in history for civilization adapting to large-scale technological change. We've been here before. So I'm going to skip on to the end of this, which is what you can do about it. I mean, I strongly advise reading the white paper because it's got more detail in it than I've really been able to do justice in this time frame. But here are some things you can do practically. The first one is assess your AI maturity. Just find out where you are. If you don't know where you are, it's very, very difficult to try and plot a road ahead. So this is Edifai's AI maturity matrix, and I'm not the most qualified person to explain this, but you can absolutely talk to the Edifai team about it. But there are a number of different strands to it. So looking at the role of AI in your organization first, where do you think you are? Look at people's levels of knowledge. Roughly where do you think you are? How's your data organized? What sort of technology stack are you currently using? And are your processes or procedures in a state where they may be able to be automated or enhanced by AI? Now, this doesn't have to be a huge onerous assessment. You can just get the leadership team together, sit in a room and just do a little finger in the air. So are we a 1? Are we a 5? Where are we roughly in the middle? And at least it gives you an idea of where you might want to focus your efforts or flex a bit. Sorry, Nick, I've probably murdered that. Upskill your people, training. This is ongoing. There are about, as I said earlier on, World Economic Forum is sort of estimating that about 59% of Western workforce, so traditional white collar workers, are likely to be at risk of displacement. However, and so you need to be focusing on them, but you've got to start with the exec. You've got to start with your leadership team. If they don't really appreciate what it's possible to do and what the implications are for what's coming next, then it's going to be virtually impossible for you to get any kind of initiatives off the ground. So aim for 100% exec literacy. And then start looking at hypothetical new roles in the organization. This is sort of looking a little bit further ahead, but still, only 2, 3, 4 years ahead. It's worth doing this kind of projection into the future now before it hits you in the face. I've linked to a really, I don't know, inspiring, funny article. Anyway, the New York Times did a whole load of research into hypothetical new roles in the future. And some of them are just nonsense, but some of them actually are grounded in what might be useful reality. So like a 0-day analyst, when new models come out, somebody who is sufficiently educated on the subject matter to be able to say, okay, this is important for us. This isn't important for us. This has an implication for this aspect of our organization. Digital twin modeling. A digital twin, if you don't know, is where you take a process or a person or a set of workflows and you recreate them in a digital format so that they can be executed automatically. So someone who can model digital twins or someone who can design workflows. It's like, okay, given this new capability, we can change how we do this part in our business. So operations is going to be quite important for you. Run safe experiments. You're probably bored of hearing this as a bit of advice, but it is good advice. Just do rolling pilots. Try not to get into the state where you have all these pilot programs that then you bin and do nothing with. It's like focus on something that's actually going to generate you money to start with, or is going to save you money to start with. Focus on those. Make sure you get them to a state where they could potentially be production ready, and then integrate them into your business operating system. And the last thing I wanted to mention here is about digital sovereignty. So this is lots of big ideas all in one go, but if you are working in an organization and your entire technology stack is owned by a corporation in the USA, let's say, for example, let's say it's Microsoft, and then say there is a political administration over there that decides they want to be able to see what's going on inside the data that has been generated or used by organizations around the world. That becomes a little bit of a risk, and you end up having countries or nation states like Denmark and Germany, who have just both announced this. They're binning all Microsoft products. They're binning Windows, and then they're going to replace it with Linux. They're binning Office 365, all that kind of stuff. They're just getting rid of it wholesale and replacing it with open source technologies that they can control, that they can be totally sure that they're not giving away some of their digital sovereignty to another power. So don't be totally beholden to these giant vendors, technology vendors. Have a look at some of the open source options out there which allow you more control and safety. They're just as good in many instances as the big frontier vendors now. Getting there. So to wrap up, if you're still here, the white paper that I've been banging on about, it's definitely worth reading. I highly recommend it. You can scan this QR code. Nick, is there another way that people can get hold of it?
Yeah, scan the QR code or click the link that we've just shared in the chat, and you'll be able to download that white paper. And absolutely feel free to share it with your colleagues. As Phil said, it's got a lot more kind of detail around what we've been discussing today, and some more practical kind of guidance on the steps that you can take.
Which brings us to Q&A. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to do my best. I do appreciate that might be a bit overwhelming. You may well think it's alarmist. You may well think it's totally fantastical. But this is based on a dispassionate review of the current evidence that's available.
Brilliant. We have a couple of questions that have come through, and we will take 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A feature there at the bottom of Zoom. And definitely make sure you have taken that advanced link to the white paper if you are interested in getting a copy of that. Um, just a question from me, Phil. On one of the slides earlier, you spoke about kind of 2030 and this idea of AI organizations. What do you think that looks like? What is an AI organization? Maybe for a bit of context.
Well, it's not a human organization, so it's not a company for a start. So it's like a swarm of agents, which are like little mini self-governing entities who run their own enterprise. Um, so if you, I'm trying to think of, it's hard to put something in in words that describes the impact on a current organization today, because in many ways, an intelligent swarm would make lots of organizations that exist today totally irrelevant. But from an HR point of view, perhaps you can think of imagine having AI entities which are both the talent inside your organization that need managing in some way or another, but they're also likely to be managers in their own right, and they may well be coming up with shaping governance rules or shaping culture, perhaps, or certainly regulatory compliance. Um, and it does bring into question, well, what is the role of a human in that scenario? And I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. I think it would depend. I mean, you could see the role of a human as being like a conductor for a swarm, or a director of a choreography or something like that. And the human having a back and forth relationship with this swarm, where the human has some ideas about what it is we want to do. We want to grow the business by 50%, for example. But the swarm might have other ideas. They might say, look, rather than focusing on growing the business by 50% in this quarter, why do we do this instead? Because then that allows us to do X, Y, and Z. So it becomes a bit of a back and forth, like a little parliament of advisors, but less idiotic.
That whole concept, I guess, of HITL or human in the loop, which
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
very popularized at the moment.
Yeah.
You'll also, I mean, many people here may have seen the news recently where Sam Altman basically predicted in the next kind of 6 months there'll be the first company valued at $1 billion with a single employee. So it's yeah, that this 2030 might seem like an insane alarmist kind of thing, but that's 4 years away, which is a very long time in this world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only had ChatGPT in its very first clunky instance. What was it, 18 months ago? No,
Yeah,
2 years ago.
that's on to
So, yeah, it's moving incredibly fast, and it's getting faster. I mean, Dario Amodi at Anthropic, he thinks this sort of timeline I've shown you here is far too conservative, and by 2028 we're going to have super intelligence.
I've
But
got a couple of good questions coming through here. So, someone asking, like working, if you're starting out kind of working in HR, how would you future-proof yourself from being made redundant and actually get like a competitive advantage in your career? Do you have any kind of sage advice for that?
I wouldn't call it sage, but the first thing to know is you can't future-proof yourself anymore. So nothing is future-proof. That's one. So chuck that expectation out. Often when we're doing systems work and applying AI inside an organization, they're saying, well, what can we do to make sure that we're future-proof? It's like, well, you can't do anything. That's the new reality. There are things that are important. So I often think about this little Venn diagram when it comes to human beings, anyway, and how they can defend themselves. The first thing is, if you have a junior role inside an organization, don't expect that junior role is going to be around in 5 years' time. So that's one. Secondly, learn about AI. Just learn about how it works. Learn about what it can do, what it can't do, what its real strengths are, and what its real weaknesses are, because your strengths are its weaknesses. So if you can find things that it's not very good at, that is likely to be something which is going to give you an advantage in the future. But it's all changing very, very quickly. So knowing about AI on its own isn't enough. So understand about AI, understand about how data works. And I know this sounds dry and techy, but even just knowing where data comes from, what different types there are, how it can be transformed, how it can be structured, that is really useful to know, because to get the best out of AI, you have to understand about data structures and where how data goes in and out. The other thing that I'd recommend is try and spread your root system sideways a bit. So become more generalist. Learn some things which aren't about HR, which are about other aspects of the business. Learn about finance, the finance impact that the work of HR has, etc. And then the last overarching thing, which I tend to talk to people about when they ask this question, is develop relationships. So human relationships. Just become better at networking. And I know that sounds cheesy, and I absolutely hated networking until I figured out actually it's not that bad. It's just talking to people. It's those human networks, particularly as larger organizations start to fragment into smaller ones. It's your human connections between them that are going to be a real advantage.
Cool. Very good
It's
advice.
probably
Um, Another question here, which is specifically around kind of, I guess, barriers to integrating AI specifically into people's strategy, because obviously, kind of a lot of what you're talking about here is probably at odds for people who sit in HR roles who have been all about people most of their careers. Um, how would you advise kind of HR leaders to overcome, well, what are the barriers, first of all, and how would you advise HR leaders to overcome them? And I guess, in our experience at Edifai, we come up against some pretty common ones, fear, um, reluctance to
yeah.
change, like people burying their
Yeah,
head in the sand. I mean, there's quite a few obvious ones, but
yeah. I am probably not qualified to answer the question. I mean, I'm not an HR specialist. Um, I'm a generalist, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, I think talking to organisations like Edifai, and particularly Nick, you probably get a better answer out of them. Or, in fact, you might have some ideas yourself. One of the things about where we are now, which I find sort of thrilling and terrifying at the same time, is that nobody knows. Nobody knows the answers to this stuff. And it's the people who work out the answers to it. They're going to be the people who are valuable. They're going to be valuable people. So I would have a go at working it out yourself, um, which maybe sounds like a bit of a cop out because I don't work in HR.
Mhm. I've actually just going to drop my email there in the chat. If anyone joining today does want to pick up the conversation or they're kind of curious about education as part of it, please feel free to drop me a direct email. Just got another great question through. With so many AI startups, how are businesses going to be confident that the AI that they're implementing into their workflows now will actually still be around in 6 or 12 months?
Yeah,
And how can
good
it
question.
remain resilient if AI fails?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is to create a system rather than just giving people a tool. So if you give people a login to ChatGPT, who knows where that's going to be in 6 months' time, or 2 years, or 5 years? If you give them a login to Claude, then the same sort of thing applies. What you want is a system where you have a modular component, which is your AI component that can be swapped in and out. So this might get a little bit technical, but say somebody's doing some work inside an applicant tracking system. Let's hope those disappear sometime soon. But they're doing some work inside an applicant tracking system. It's some action is taken in the team, which is then connected to an AI, and an AI router. So there's a great bit of kit called Open Router, which allows you to send your commands off to an AI. But before it reaches the AI, it goes to a thing called Open Router. Open Router then has a quick little look at, okay, what kind of task is it I'm being asked to do? And then it will send that data or request off to the most appropriate model. And you want those models to be sat in your system in a modular way. So if something goes wrong, or say there's some geopolitical change and we can't use something in a particular region anymore, then you can just swap that bit out for a different AI model, and your workflow still works. So yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket is I suppose what I would say to start with, and try and create systems rather than just getting people to log into ChatGPT or something like that.
Cool. I think that's a great answer to kind of both those questions as well. So like think about the workflow and um, incorporate it into processes rather than invest the time into the process refinement versus the kind of tools. One last question that's come in here. It's kind of a little bit repetitive, I think, on some of the stuff that we've covered, but just to ask it as well. Anything else specifically that you think HR teams can do to keep up with the latest kind of information around? It's a very fast-moving space. Obviously, my advice would be download the white paper, subscribe to
Yeah.
the Edifai newsletter. We run webinars like this every month around different topics to do with AI. But anything else that you'd recommend, Phil?
No, I mean, actually, subscribing to your newsletter is probably the most appropriate thing you could do because it's directly related to training, upskilling, etc. I would also, though, maybe try to take a bit of pressure off yourself. You can't realistically keep up with all the news at the moment. I do this all day, every day as a professional, and I can't keep up with it. I don't know everything, and nobody can. There are some tools that you could create which would allow you to sort of pull in news feeds from all sorts of different sorts of places and then just automatically give you a little digest of the stuff that's specifically important to you because you told it this is important to me. But yeah, I would start with the Edify newsletter. If you want to go really, really deep, there are a bunch of other news sources out there. Rather than keeping up with the news, though, I think the most important thing is to just play with these tools and try and break them. If there's something that you're asked to do at work, and it's safe to do so, then have a go at doing it with an AI model and push it to its limits. It's those limits. It's that kind of, some people talk about the jagged edge of AI. It's really good at some things and really rubbish at other things that you think it should be really good at, like how many R's are in strawberry. Just push it to its limits, find where those gaps are, and then you are going to be as educated about this as anybody else.
Great, great, great advice. So, Phil, and obviously, if you're sitting in a HR team and this has been seen as a strategic priority for the business, you're kind of seeing AI starting to upset people, or you're deploying some specific AI tools, Enterprise GPT or Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini, and you're kind of thinking about how do we get people aligned around this? How do we educate people? Definitely reach out to myself or the team, or have a look at the work that we do. We work with many of the big agency groups, many small independent agencies as well. So, Phil, just a huge thank you for joining us.
All right.
I imagine many people who have joined probably leaving here with more questions than answers, but that's not a bad thing. We'll definitely get the white paper out to everyone who's been here, who's filled out the form. We'll share the link to that one more time in the chat. To everyone that's attended, been a very busy session, but thank you all very much. And like I said, uh, keep an eye on our blog or subscribe to us if you want to find out more about future webinars like this that we're holding. Brilliant job, everyone, and thank you very much, Phil.
Very welcome. Bye all. Have a nice day.